Welcome to Yonkers Voice. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the news and the truth coming to you. Today we have Joe Pinion, who is a candidate for assemblyman, and he is a Republican. Don't hold it against him. And he is vying for the seat that Shelley Mayer vacated in her bid for Senate. So we're going to get right to the point. Joe, here we are again.
Well, good to be here. And thank you again to the Yonkers Voice, obviously, for having me and giving me the opportunity to talk to the people about the issues that have been affecting Yonkers pretty much my entire life.
Okay, I'm going to start out with an issue that is affecting Yonkers right now. In the last wave of migrant children coming up from Texas, there were 70 of those children who have been placed in facilities in Westchester County. One of them allegedly being Yonkers. We don't have confirmation, so we don't know for sure. And we know that as an assemblyman, it is not within your legislative power to legislate either way.
Correct.
But how would your influence weigh in on this migrant issue?
Well, I think we have to be honest, with the people to say that realistically, your assemblyman, being one of 155 people, lacks the legislative purview to have any actual impact on the issue. But at the same time, I think that as an elected official, you can bring your voice and be a person of advocacy to talk about the model for what New York should accept and should not accept. And I think it is without question that children being separated from their parents is, without a doubt, unquestionably horrific. And so to me, I think that I personally always take issue with politicians that like to make promises about issues that they literally can do nothing about. And so I wouldn't do that here. But what I will say is that to me it is heinous. I think that it is something that as a state, as legislative members of the state, I think that we can take a stand and stand in solidarity, irrespective of our political alignment, to say that, look, these are things that should not be happening, and we most certainly will not be housing the byproduct of such a heinous act here in our state.
Okay, but it almost you're a member of the Republican Party, and it almost sounds contradictory to the policy of the president.
Well,
so
I wouldn't say that. I think that there are plenty of Republicans in D.C. And again, like I said, this race for New York State Assembly, you're talking about the issues that have been affecting New York, have been affecting the state of New York, but particularly Yonkers at the state level. There are plenty of national issues that I think that people get inflamed about, this being one of them that I think are heinous. I think there are Republicans, many in fact, my colleagues, people I work with every day, that are horrified by this. But again, to me, my reason for getting in this race was not to try to fix D.C. Because again, that has its own problems, and Lord knows how that's going to happen.
But to interrupt you, but you still have the problem of overcoming the branding, because right now the perception is, I don't know if people are taking the time to separate the good Republicans from the Republicans that are pro-Trump, and particularly on this issue of these children. How do you distinguish yourself from the people who are pro-child detention?
Well, look, I think that, again, first and foremost, this race is not going to be about child detention. I think, to your point, it is difficult in this environment where we have the increase in tribalism for people on both sides to be like, I'm a Democrat and I vote for Democrats, or I'm a Republican and I vote for Republicans. The reality is that the imminent dangers and the imminent threats in Yonkers, I think, will force people in this election to take a different look. We've been having a rock-solid, delegation that's been going to Albany on our behalf that has failed to deliver a single dollar in municipal aid for our city. That is just the facts. The fact is that we just had to bust the tax cap here in Yonkers an extra 6.5% because of the fact that we haven't received proper funding from Albany. These are facts. When my mother's not going to get a star rebate this year because, again, we exceeded that 2% tax increase. So issue by issue, again, our thesis of our campaign is that Yonkers has invested in the state of New York, but the state of New York has not invested in Yonkers. And that has absolutely nothing to do with any of the policies that I might find abhorrent from the Trump administration or anybody else might find tasteful. But it does have everything to do with what's been happening in Yonkers for the last 35 years.
So how do you sway Democrats to your side? How do you? I mean, there's always going to be the hardliners, but there will also be those who are right on the fence and they say, well, this guy's a Republican, but maybe he has a lot to say.
Well, to me,
So
again,
how do you get
I'm
that
not
kind
running as somebody who is running for the Republican Party. The Republican Party didn't ask me to run for this seat. I'm not running as somebody who is here to defend the president or to tear down the president. I'm here to lift up the people of Yonkers. That is why I got in this race. I got in this race to help people, like my neighbor, Raleigh Troop, who was also my fourth grade teacher, who's lived in Yonkers for the last 15 years, 18 years, has 5 children, doesn't know when he's ever going to be able to retire because he has to put those children to school at the same time that the tax levies here in Yonkers continue to go up and up and up. Running for, my grandmother and other seniors like her who are either have to be forced out of their home or are living in a state where 80% of the healthcare resources are consumed by senior citizens, and yet we haven't actually shifted the way in which we pay for healthcare or deliver healthcare services to address that fact. So to me, yes, I understand the anger and the frustration, and Lord knows I think me more than any other candidate in this race. I've gone on CNN, I've gone on national television, I've gone on national radio, beamed into 150 million homes at a time to talk about the things that I believe are horribly wrong with Washington politics and horribly wrong with some of the things that this administration has done. But that is not why I got in this race. I got in this race to truly make sure that people in Yonkers can believe in Yonkers again. And I think that the more I get to come on programs like this, the more I get to sit down, and when I go to people's doors and talk about this, I think it's apparent that I'm in this for the right reasons. I'm not in this for 2 years on my pension. I'm not in this to launch some dreamy political career. I'm in this race because I truly want to make a difference in the lives of the people that I've grown up around, and for the city that's made me the person I am today.
But people might, cynics might also look at the job as assemblyman as merely a springboard position to a higher political office. You're young, you're brilliant, and the question is, would you stop here as an assembly person, or would you just use this as a launching pad for further political aspirations and therefore not devote that much time to Yonkers?
No, I'm in this Yonkers first and foremost for Yonkers. Our campaign slogan again is "Believe in Yonkers." If you told me a year and a half ago I was going to run for this seat, I'd have told you you're a crazy person. But the fact remains is that I'm the only child of Verona Mae Greenland. That woman literally mortgaged her happiness and her future to make sure that all the successes and the opportunities that I had were possible. And so when my mother retires 2 years ago and starts sending me text messages in the middle of the night saying that I don't know how we're going to pay these property taxes, when I'm listening to teachers that literally, I have Bob Friselli, who's a part of the Son of Italy organization here in Yonkers, but again, lifelong Yonkers resident who again picked me up from school from the time I was 4.5 years old to the time I was 13 years old, who also helped me, coach me in football, and was one of the individuals that helped me get along the way to be able to go to college on an athletic grant and play college football. When I listen to their stories about how they're thinking seriously about having to leave this city that I love, this city that they love, I can't stand by and do nothing. We had an incumbent, I got in this race before it was an open seat. I'm the only person in this race that got in this race before it was an open seat.
You're unopposed so far on the Republican ticket.
Yes, and so, to me, again, it's not a matter of finding somebody who has the right party next to their name. It's about finding somebody who has the pain and suffering of Yonkers embedded in their spirit. And to me, right now, we're focused on making sure that the people that call this city home, whether you live in Lincoln Park, whether you live in Crestwood, no matter where you live in Yonkers, no matter what side of Nepperhan you come from, to make sure that we are getting funded. And right now, I don't care if you're a black or brown child, I don't care if you're an Italian or Irish immigrant. The reality is that the greatest threat to your future, your safety, are politicians in Albany who do not believe that Yonkers has value. And that, to me, is the reality of why we're in this situation today, why we've been here literally my entire life, and why if we don't start making decisions differently, if we don't start saying, who is the best person for the job? Who recognizes the problem and who has a pathway to a more promising future? We're never going to change things. And that's why I got in this race, not for a future, not for a springboard, to truly make sure that I can make a difference right here where I live, where I've called home my entire life.
One of the most, this budget that was just passed, in my experience, has been one of the most contentious bit of wrangling about who gets what and how much is spent. I mean, it's a mess, but the thing is that it was settled. So when you look at the aftermath of the budget, there are a lot of walking wounded at this point. particularly in the fire department, you've got, I believe it's 4 ranking YFD people, 5 ranking people, 5 YFD ranking upper tier firemen
Right.
that are being demoted.
Yep.
Now these guys got to take a 22% pay cut.
Yep.
Which is a lot of money. You're talking about, a fourth of your salary just went down the drain.
Yep.
So and there's no guarantee that this issue isn't going to come up in future budgets. They partially dodged the bullet this time. But what's going to happen next year? How do you win the uniformed services over? How do you reassure these guys that, when it comes around again, you're not going to have to deal with this?
Well, I'll take a step further. I will guarantee that this issue will come up again because it comes up every single year. Every single year we have a budget crisis, and somehow, either on the backs of the people of Yonkers, the backs of the people that are the backbone of the city of Yonkers, our best and our bravest, all the time, we end up putting that burden on their back.
But what's going to be different the next time? Because we're hearing this time and time ad nauseum.
I will tell you right now, if we don't change, if we continue to sign up for business as usual, nothing will be different. It will actually only be worse. So, again, I got in this race for the simple fact that Yonkers has not been treated fairly. The reality is, right now, if you're a fireman right now who's just got demoted, I would encourage you to go down to the Board of Elections and probably sign up to run against Andrew Stewart-Cousins. If you're a person who was a police officer who was on the chopping block, and all of a sudden now, because they just increased the tax levy on your neighbor by on average $350 per family, I would encourage you to go down to the Board of Elections and run against Gary Pretlow. We have a delegation that, as much as we may like them, as much as they have been our friends and our colleagues, have not delivered results. That is just the reality. I got in this race for the simple fact that I did not believe that the person who held this seat at that time was delivering results. And time again, as a city, we just fall in line. We say whoever the Democratic Party puts up, that's the person we're going to have. We have a fire department, a fire union, a police union, a teachers union that have, between personal dues and between the money their unions have actually contributed to our delegation over the past 10 years, have contributed nearly $250,000. Every single one of those people in delegation, spare one, has gotten a promotion and a raise. The fire department is sitting here looking at pink slips. The police department is sitting here looking at pink slips. Teachers sitting here looking at pink slips. With these, budgets are moral documents. That's what they are. And so when you start talking about, out of the left side of your mouth, that I'm against, child bullying, and on the right side of your mouth talking about laying off 35 bus monitors, you're not serious. You're not credible. The reason I'm in this race and why, I take fault or take umbrage with some of my opponents is because the reality is either they recognize that there was a problem and they kept their mouth silent because of political expediency, or they didn't recognize there was a problem. Either way, at this point, to me, it's the height of hypocrisy to suddenly jump in the race on a slogan basically saying that I alone can fix it. That, to me, is not a credible pathway to making sure that Yonkers has the future that we deserve.
Which brings me to something that you and I had talked about before, that in a way, being a Republican has an advantage, because upstate, the assembly basically is controlled more or less by the Republicans, and you would be able, as a Republican, to be able to work with them to get,
I think,
as a member of the club, so to speak.
Look, I think that, to me, I'm not hopefully depending on my voter registration not getting done.
But the thing about it gives you a party advantage.
But the reality is, look, there is a Democratic supermajority in the assembly. If you're talking about from a strategic standpoint, we gain nothing by sending another person there who is just, again, going to toe the line and rubber stamp whatever comes out of that assembly body. To me, if you're talking about people who talk about the fact that we have had Republican control of the Senate, we don't know how that composition is going to shake out in the coming year. But the reality is, to me, I think that between the fact that I think I recognize the problems, I think I have an opportunity to be able to sit down in rooms that other people choose not to go into and advocate in a different manner for this city that will be effective. To me, I think that can be a way that we can, to me, hopefully work in within the party and also work in a bipartisan manner to make sure that in this election, in this term, we actually finally start to get some action and some movement forward for the city.
What you're young, and people would say, you're a political novice, and you don't have the experience, you don't have the ability to maneuver through all the political nuances to get the job done. So how do you what makes you think you're qualified for the job?
Well, I mean, look, this is very, very clear. I think I've worked in the nonprofit sector. I've literally helped spearhead a scholarship programs for at-risk youth to the tune of $180,000 a year in scholarship grants for those individuals, understanding that we can actually intervene for individuals with small donations and small dollar figures that make all the difference for children living at or below the poverty level between do they stay home or do they have the resources to go away to college. You know, I've done that. I come from a family of nonprofit service. My mother founded, one of the first federally qualified community-driven health centers here in New York. Ended up serving as the president of Chicane's, the community health centers of New York, for a very long time. And so our family vacations, were for me going to healthcare conferences, learning about the AIDS crisis and the AIDS epidemic in the Bronx, and things of that nature. So, my entire life has really been geared towards service to others, service to community. Professionally, I've worked on plenty of campaigns. I've worked on as a strategist for presidential campaigns in New Hampshire and South Carolina. I understand, the intersection of politics and service. I understand the intersection of politics and advocacy. And so to me, I can bring those forces to bear. I can take that with the business experience that I have working as a business consultant, also being an individual who started a small business and saying, I know what is required to start a business. I know the challenges of running the business. And I also know how government can be effective in making sure that we can provide opportunities for the people who have less and the people who need greater access. And I think that all of those things combined make me, in many ways, a good choice for somebody to go to Albany and advocate for a city that has been underprovided for again well over 30 years.
Who has endorsed you so far, and who has been your greatest financial contributor? Who's assisted you the most so far financially?
Well, look, financially right now, we've been fortunate enough to be dependent on friends and family. We're not out there, begging for corporate donors. We haven't received any corporate donations to this campaign. It's really been on the strength of individuals who truly believe in Yonkers, individuals who don't even live in Yonkers.
But what businesses have endorsed you so far?
Well, I haven't spoken to any businesses about endorsements, and I don't plan on speaking to any businesses about endorsements because, again, I got in this race to advocate for the people of this city. If there are businesses who recognize that Yonkers is underleveraged, if there are businesses that recognize that we have all of the ingredients to be a thriving city, to be a shining city, and understand that Yonkers in many ways is the mansion that time forgot.
What about unions? Have you got?
So I've reached out to unions. I've obviously reached out to police and fire, and I will continue to do so. To me, again, as I said before, that literally, though our unions are the bedrock of this city. The fact that, again, we just looked at budget proposals where people were talking about laying off 72 police officers, 251 school personnel, shutting down 2 firehouses. That is a quality of life apocalypse. That quality of life apocalypse time bomb that is waiting to go off because, again, all we did was dodge the bullet a year. And I promise you next year, Governor Cuomo is not coming down here with $8 million because he doesn't have to get elected anymore. So that's just the reality. So when you sit here and talk about what does the future of Yonkers hold for us, it holds pain and suffering for the people that live here, the people that call here home, if we do not start to do things differently.
So it almost sounds like, that's a good point about Cuomo not needing to intervene again next year, but you're starting to sound like the canary in the coal mine. Does that mean that unless things are corrected, we're headed to the precipice again, only worse in the next budget?
Yes, we are headed to the precipice. We are sitting on the precipice. Right now, we're just holding on by a thread, this lifeline that was extended by the governor because he needs to ingratiate himself to the base in order to hopefully hold off this Cynthia Nixon challenge. We know this. We know he has higher ambitions. This is not a secret. It is hiding in plain sight. And so, to me, my campaign is to talk about what are the things that we can change. Every single politician that runs for office in Westchester County, and particularly in Yonkers, says Yonkers doesn't get their fair share.
What's the first thing that you would change once you get elected?
First thing I do is to go up there and demand or ask with my colleagues that the state allow the Yonkers personal income tax to sunset. It is a tax that has been in place since 1984. It was a compromise measure with the state legislature that the state would give Yonkers $10 million in response to the federal lawsuit that we received in 1980 for segregation in our public housing and segregation in our public schools. And in return, the state would give us the authority to levy a personal income tax on the people that live in Yonkers, basically telling us to make like Jesus and heal ourselves. That, to me, has never actually worked, but to me, it also, we have a legacy now. We have 30 years of saying that not only are our schools more segregated today than they were when we got sued, but also we have annual budget gaps. So clearly it didn't work. And so embedded in that was a sunset clause. That sunset clause was 35 years. 35 years will be next year, 2019. First thing I'm doing is to say that repeal that tax, let that money stay in the pockets of the people that live in Yonkers. And also, now we can start to approach the other inequities that have permeated our budget process. When you look at the fact that Yonkers has 450 acres of state-owned land that the state pays zero property taxes on, as opposed to the 90% of the land that it owns statewide that it pays property taxes on. That's millions and millions of dollars of unrealized revenue here in this state that we are not receiving. The fact that Empire Casino contributes more money to the state education fund than 6 of the 8 racinos in the entire state combined, and yet we are only getting 5% of those resources because of the fact of this ridiculous formula that gets the state 80%, that gives surrounding counties 5%, and that gives the county 10%. If we were getting just 7.5% to 10% of the dollars that, again, start here in Yonkers, the budget gap that we just were fighting over about how many teachers are we going to fire, how many firefighters are we going to fire, how many police officers are we going to fire, wouldn't exist.
It's a bad analogy, but it reminds me of the old commercial Roach Motel where the roaches check in but they don't check out. It's like the money checks in, and it gets sent, it gets dispersed all over, but it never comes back.
We have
to Yonkers.
We have something called a hold harmless provision as far as how we fund our schools, which says that no school district that can receive less money any one year than they did the previous year, which sounds harmless, but it really has a detrimental effect on Yonkers because Yonkers is the fastest growing school district in the entire state outside of New York City, and so over the last 5 years. And so if you look at that in a state where high school enrollment is down 6%, and say you have dollars trapped in districts that have seen enrollment decrease by 10%, 15%, and meanwhile we still can't get more than a 70% reimbursement on the dollar for capital investments where Buffalo, Rochester, and Syracuse are getting 98 cents on the dollar. These are also places where, by the way, we pay more taxes here in Yonkers than those 3 cities combined. So, if you're saying what I'm working on, making sure that we are taken care of fairly, which again is not a catchphrase like other people use it, there are actual specific things that we can do without having to change the overall formula that can make sure that Yonkers finally stops getting the short end of the stick.
And that's a good way to end it. I'd like you to give a phone number or contact information in case people want to get in contact with Joe prior to the election. So you tell the audience.
We want to hear from everybody in Yonkers. You can hear more about our campaign at joepinion.com. That's J-O-E, Pinion, as in opinion without the O, P-I-N-I-O-N, so joepinion.com. You can find us on social media at Pinion4NY. That's Pinion, my last name, number 4, NY, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Obviously, reach out to us on our website. We have a link that says Talk to Joe. You can click on that link and literally ask me any question you want, schedule a time based on our schedule, and then we'll have a phone call. So I'm looking forward to hearing from all the people of Yonkers to truly make sure that we are one heart, we are one city, we are one Yonkers, and it's time that we start acting like it.
And that's it. Thanks for tuning in to Yonkers Voice, folks. Another chapter, another episode where the news comes to you unvarnished and unbiased. So stay tuned for the next Yonkers Voice. Thanks.